in this 5th lecture, we are going to talk about instruments of measure. Why instruments of measure? Remember, we said quantitative method of research is about numbers, and therefore we need to measure the variables. And to measure the variables, we need to have scales, we need to have instruments. So when we talk about questionnaires or just instruments of collecting data in research, actually these instruments should give us quantitative numeral data. And that's why technically in quantitative research, we don't simply talk about instruments of data collection, we talk about instruments of measure. So that is the first point. So ask yourself, in your quantitative research, are you having an instrument for measure? And does this instrument of measure cover all the variables that are in your conceptual framework? The second point that we need to discuss about instruments of measure is reliability and validity. The instruments of measure should be reliable. What does it mean? That this instrument, when used under the same circumstances with the same similar population, will yield the same results consistently. Then this instrument is reliable. Now, what is validity? Validity is a confidence that this instrument really measures what is reality, what is true. So let us say I have a balance in my dining room, and every morning I weigh myself before breakfast. Now this scale is flawed, let us suppose, that it is showing always consistently 5 kilos less, and which means because it is consistent, it is reliable. But since it is not showing the true weight, it is not valid. So similarly, we could have in quantitative research reliable measurements and valid measurements. For an ideal research, our instruments of measure should be at the same time reliable and valid. So reliability and validity are two terms that you hear again and again in research. There is no escape from it. Here we are talking about reliability and validity of instruments, but we could talk about reliability and validity of the finding. A little bit different, but they are related. Now, to measure something, we need to define that thing clearly. So what are we measuring in quantitative research? We are measuring variables. First, let us talk about what are variables. You hear this term so often in research. I'm sure in your primary school, you have learned the formula for an area of a circle. A is equal to pi r squared. Now, A is a symbol that indicates the area of a circle. R is a radius, whereas pi is a constant, 22/7. Now, in that formula, there is a constant called pi. There are two variables, A and R, area of a circle and the radius of a circle. Now, why are they called variables? Because it can have any value. We do not know its value. At the same time, they are measurable. They are variables. Thirdly, that one variable depends on another variable. This is exactly what happens in research. If I say the results in an examination depends on the number of hours that I spend in private study, then there are two variables there, number of hours in a private study and results in an examination. Now, hypothetically, we are assuming that one variable depends on another variable. So the variable that is supposed as the consequence of one variable is the dependent variable. And the variable that is presupposed or hypothesized, assumed to be the precedent or the antecedent to this consequent, is the independent variable. And as I said in an earlier lecture, in quantitative research, we are trying to examine the association between variables and to be neat between two variables. So one variable is called the independent variable and the other is dependent variable, and we are measuring them. We could have other variables, mediating variables, moderating variables, confounding variables, and all that. So these are variables, types of variables on their function. Now I'm taking you into a little more intriguing topic. We can talk about types of variables on the basis of the content, not on the basis of the function that we have talked about, but on the content. What type of numbers do we have inside? What type of quantitative data do we have in this variable? And according to that, there are 4 types of variables based on the content. To begin with, we have what we call ratio variable or scale variable. SPSS calls it scale. What is a scale variable? A scale variable is a quantitative data where 0 means 0, and the interval between every unit is uniform. So if if I'm measuring a variable in terms of a degree or in terms of levels, then I have 1, 2, 3, say age. I can have 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And the gap between 1 and 2 is 1. The gap between 2 and 3 is 1. So it is the same gap across these numbers. Then it is called a scale variable. As it increases or decreases, it goes in a similar pattern. And where 0 will be absence of anything, that 0 is nothing, then it is a scale variable. The second type of variable is what we call nominal variable. Nominal variable, are also called categorical variables, are certain way we categorize people. We group participants into different, based on certain criteria. So let us say gender. Gender is a nominal variable. We cannot measure gender in terms of degree or scale. We cannot say somebody is more male or in terms of a scale of 10 points. But we say either male or female. Now, we can reduce that into quantitative data. How? In a population or a sample, we can say 51% was male, 49% was female. So what have we done? We have reduced the number of people into quantifiable data. We have reduced gender to quantifiable data. And this is a nominal variable. In nominal variable, we are actually counting the number of participants in a particular category. Nominal variable. The nominal is a name that we are giving to a group of people. Nominal variable. There are also other 2 variables which are not very important for our research at this point, but just to mention, the third type is interval variable. Interval variable is like temperature, where 0 is not actually 0. It's only a reference point. So if I say water freezes at 0 degrees centigrade, it does not mean absence of temperature. There, 0 simply means a reference point. And usually, in terms of the degree of temperature, the distance between units is not uniform. And so it is interval variable. And then there is a 4th type of variable on the basis of the content, and we call it ordinal variable, ordinal numbers. I'm sure you have studied the difference between cardinal variables, cardinal numbers and ordinal numbers. Ordinal numbers order participants in a rank. So ranks are simply ordinal numbers. So there is a difference between scale variables and ordinal variables. For example, let us say Juma got 280 marks in his KCPE, and he got first rank in his school. Whereas, let us say there is Neema who got 320 marks in her school and scored first rank. Now, the number 1 in these 2 schools are not the same, though they are called number 1s in terms of rank. But in the scale variable, they are different. So, there are numbers and numbers. And that is, we must know these different types of numbers when we are handling quantitative data. So, when we are operationalizing our research, we need to think very clearly how we are going to plan the collection of data in terms of the measurement of our variables. So, let us only focus on nominal variables and scale variables. Nominal variables are straightforward. You ask things like your gender, male, female. You can ask in terms of religious affiliation. They are nominal variables. You can ask in terms of educational levels, nominal variables. Let us take, for example, a variable like age. Now, age could be measured as a scale variable or as a nominal variable. So, if I ask the participant to write down their actual age in terms of years, then if I have 100 participants in my sample, then I'm going to have really a varied number in terms of a scale, in terms of a degree of ages within this sample. But I can also convert that question of that variable of age into a nominal variable. I sort of group them. I give them the option to tick, say, between three groups, 18 to 24, 25 to 28, 29 to 32. Now they tick, which means I am grouping them into sort of categories. Then the same age becomes a nominal variable. So I need to see how I'm going to measure my variables. Am I going to measure them in terms of nominal variables or in terms of scale variables? So let us say if I ask my participants, were you happy on the day of your wedding, assuming that they were all married people? Yes or no, then that yes or no is a nominal variable. Whereas if I ask another way, can you mark in terms of a scale of 1 to 10, your happiness level on the day of your wedding, then I'm going to get a score. I'm going to get a scale variable. Now, depending on how you are going to measure, the analysis is going to be different. And therefore, you need to think out already how you want to measure the variables. Another last point about this measurement of variables is that if you measure nominal variable, it is difficult to convert nominal variables to scale variables. But if you measure them in scale variables, you can always group them into nominal variables. Now, there are some variables that cannot be measured in single items. You cannot, for example, let us say you want to see the relationship between religiosity and happiness. And religiosity you want to measure in terms of being part of a church or a religion, reading the scriptures, participating in worship. These are dimensions now. And when you measure these dimensions, you might add up to a variable called religiosity. Now, happiness. You can measure happiness in terms of subjective happiness, how one feels, how others perceive this person. So you have to determine how you're going to measure them. Now, things like happiness, you can't simply ask people, are you happy or not? You get an opinion. You may not get access to a reality. And therefore, you need multiple item scale to measure abstract constructs like happiness, forgiveness, women empowerment, whatever. As abstract they are, we need more and more items. And these items can be asked in different ways. So let us talk about the ways you can frame the questions in your instrument. One of the standard ways of measuring items is in terms of a Likert scale with a capital L, because it's the name of a person. Likert scale. Usually, Likert scale is used when you have to measure a continuous variable, a variable that is a continuum, that is in a spectrum. So you can give a range of numbers from 1 to 10, 1 to 7, 1 to 5. You can measure in a 5-point scale starting with 0 to 4. So that is called a Likert scale. The second type of items is multiple choice items, where you give participants choices, let's say yes, no, not sure. Now that is a multiple item and they can choose between the three. The third type is what we call vignette items. They are scenarios. These questions are very useful, especially if you're measuring attitudes. So let us say you give an item like this. You are asleep in your room and suddenly you sort of feel suffocated. There is smoke. What is your immediate reaction? A, would you run out of the room? 2, would you look for other people in the room, how they are? 3, would you try to see the source of the smoke? Or 4, I would just freeze. Now, depending on how individuals choose, we can have a whole scale of similar items and say probably this person has this attitude. And this type of questions are called vignette items. So, talking about the instruments, the point that I'm making is that the abstract constructs need many items, and these items could use different forms. But when you're measuring the same variable, it is important to maintain the same structure of items so that you can put them together. You can add up the scores to give every individual a score on that variable. Now, finally, I would say, as an undergraduate student, try not to come up with your own questionnaires. There are so many instruments of measure available already on almost anything under the sun. You think of any variable, you are most likely to find a ready-made scale. Now, how to go about this? On the screen, you see 6 steps on selecting a scale for your study. Just use Google. You put the word scale followed by the key term. Let us say scale women empowerment. And then the Google is going to produce a list of items. Examine those items. Go one by one. Is it really giving certain scales that can be used to measure your variable called women empowerment? Select the one that will fit. So you might change keywords as a third step when maybe actually the internet is using, universally they are using different term, but you are using another term. You might see it coming up. And so you change your search term and refine your list and go through the items one by one in the list. Sometimes they are just published articles on a scale. Sometimes they are really ready-made scales. They tell you how to use it, how to calculate your findings, what are the difficulties there. They will even give report on where this was used previously, under which population, and things like that. And these information are very useful. Step 4, read academic articles that have published this scale. Original article where the scale was for the first time published. And read articles that have used this scale in their own research. And see if there is any article that has really used the scale within the population that you are studying or a similar population. Let us say you are going to use this scale in Kenya. Has it been used in Nigeria, South Africa? This will give you confidence that it has been previously used in the African population. So you can use it. You can justify your choice. Suppose this scale has never been used in Africa, and you think it seems very meaningful for an African population, then you might have to carry out a pilot study just to test its reliability in the African population. And the 5th step is modify your research questions based on your variables. Sometimes you started with a variable in the beginning in your research question, and then you realize that there are no scales available for this variable, probably because you are too idealistic, probably because this variable is not measurable. But you find a scale that measures a related variable, then you will have to reframe your research question. You have to reframe your research topic according to the variable that is measurable and for which a scale is available readily. And then choose the right scale. Don't give the participants all the details about the scale. What the participants need to know is the items. They answer the items. You will know which items are adding up to which variable. In the actual questionnaire, it is important that the questionnaire is neat, facilitating answering of the participants. Imagine and realize that participants are giving their time to you. Participants have many things to do, and so don't irritate the participants by giving a questionnaire that is all confused. The second important detail in quantitative research, especially if you're going to do your analysis using SPSS, then every item in your questionnaire should have a sequential unique number. Don't restart the numbering of your items according to the variables. Then it will become difficult when you're processing your data. Every item should have a unique number. Now, these are practical issues that you will learn by doing. And some of the problems you can foresee and avoid them if you are smart and alert. Okay, so instruments of measure.